Beneath the rising steel beams and echoing jackhammers at the Hudson Yards construction project in Manhattan, a single bark pierced the clamor. Again and again, a German shepherd paced at the chain-link fence, her eyes fixed on something deep within the labyrinth of machinery and girders. Workers paused, exchanging puzzled glances. No one could figure out why this persistent canine refused to leave. Amidst the dust and the noise, she barked non-stop, as though warning them of something just out of sight. Eventually, curiosity and concern drove the crew to investigate, and that was when they discovered a secret so startling it changed their lives forever. Construction sites in New York City are rarely calm. Machines roar to life at dawn, iron beams clang together as they're raised toward the sky, and workers shout directions over the ear-splitting grind of drills. The Hudson Yards project was no different. If anything, it was one of the busiest sites in Manhattan. A sprawling network of partially completed buildings, scaffoldings, concrete pillars, and steel frameworks, it buzzed with endless activity. Among the workers were people from all walks of life: carpenters, welders, engineers, and day laborers, each with their own stories and struggles. A tall, soft-spoken foreman named Luis Delgado oversaw a team of general construction laborers. Every morning before sunrise, Luis would stand at the main gate, sip his coffee, and mentally map out the day ahead. He prided himself on efficiency and safety, ensuring the project stayed on schedule while keeping his crew out of harm's way. Luis's careful planning often gave him a certain peace in the chaos. Yet, on a Monday morning in late spring, even he couldn't ignore the sound that sliced through the clamor of the site. It was a dog barking incessantly from just outside the tall chain-link fence. He first noticed it at around 7:00 a.m. The sky was a powdery blue, the sun glinting off fresh metal beams. At first, Luis tried to dismiss the barking as city noise. New York had no shortage of stray or lost dogs. But this bark was different. It carried urgency, a note of desperation that seemed to rise above the cacophony of engines and jackhammers. Walking over to the fence, Luis found a large German shepherd pacing back and forth, muzzle pressed against the links, ears pinned forward. Her barks came in short bursts, echoing with a kind of purposeful insistence. The dog's fur was a mixture of black and tan, with a faint patch of white on her chest. Flecks of dust coated her paws, as if she'd been roaming the area for a while. Luis crouched down, eyeing the shepherd through the fence. The dog quieted momentarily, gazing up at him with intelligent brown eyes. He noticed her sides heaving from exertion, as though she'd been barking for hours. "Hey, girl," he murmured, pitching his voice low and calm. He extended a hand, palm up. The dog sniffed the air, but seemed more focused on something behind him, beyond the fence, deeper in the construction site. Then she resumed barking, turning her head pointedly, urging him to look. A few of the other workers ambled over. One of them, a wiry man named Trevor, frowned. "We can't let a random dog in here. Liability issues, boss." "I know," Luis replied, standing up, "but there's something about her." He looked at the shepherd again. "She's not just lost. She wants us to follow her." Trevor shrugged. "Come on, Luis, we don't have time for this." But a curious expression softened his features. Before Luis could respond, the shepherd let out another series of urgent barks, darted a few paces down the fence line, and barked again, clearly beckoning them to follow. More workers paused to watch. In the swirl of dust and early morning humidity, the dog's insistence was uncanny. She seemed to be pointing them toward the western edge of the site, where a cluster of half-finished structures and deep trenches marked the next phase of the project. Finally, Luis motioned for Trevor to follow him around the perimeter, aiming to see if there was a gate or an opening that would align with the dog's direction. As they walked, The shepherd trotted alongside the fence, occasionally letting out a bark as if to say, "Yes, this way, keep going." At a side entrance used primarily for deliveries, they found an open section of fence that had yet to be sealed. The moment Louis stepped through, the German shepherd raced forward, nose to the ground, tail raised. She guided them across a gravel path, past stacks of wood pallets and cement bags, deeper into the heart of the unfinished complex. Louis glanced back at his co-workers, a knot of them trailing behind in a cautious huddle. He could read the skepticism in their faces, but none of them turned away. Something in the dog's urgency drew them on, overriding questions about schedules and responsibilities. They trudged past a deep excavation pit, where the mechanical arm of a yellow excavator loomed like a sleeping giant. The smell of wet cement and dusty metal hung in the air. The shepherd stopped short, barking at the edge of a cluster of tall plywood partitions. These partitions enclosed a poorly lit corridor of sorts, used to store surplus materials. Luis clicked on his flashlight, stepping into the narrow space between the plywood walls. The dog whined, pushing her muzzle at a gap between sheets of wood. Inside, it was dim and stuffy. Trevor rummaged for a lighter, flicking it to provide extra illumination, and that was when Louis saw it movement in the darkness. A trembling shape, partially obscured by a fallen slab of plywood. Two eyes glinted back at the light, wide with fear. Louise's heart clenched. It was a small child, curled in on herself, wearing a tattered pink hoodie caked with dust. She couldn't have been older than 8 or 9. Her dark hair clung to her forehead in sweaty clumps, and her cheeks were streaked with dirt. When the beam of the flashlight landed on her, she froze, eyes flicking between the looming strangers and the barking shepherd who stood protectively at the entryway. "Oh my God," Trevor whispered. Louis's mind spun with questions. How did a child end up here? Was she hurt? Where were her parents? Slowly, Louis crouched, raising a hand to signal the others to hold back. He softened his voice to a gentle murmur. "Hey there, sweetie. It's okay, we're not going to hurt you." Behind him, the German shepherd let out a quiet whine, stepping around to nose at the plywood slab that partially pinned the child's leg. Carefully, Trevor and another worker lifted the slab. The child recoiled at first, crying out, but once the debris was removed, she tried to straighten her leg, grimacing. Louise gently set a hand on her shoulder. "Does anything hurt?" The child nodded toward her ankle, which was twisted at an odd angle. Dirt and scrapes covered her arms. She looked thin, as if she hadn't eaten in days. The shepherd leaned in, ears flattened in concern. She gave the child a consoling lick on the arm. To everyone's amazement, the child pressed her face into the dog's fur, sobbing. It was as though the German shepherd was the only one she trusted in that terrifying moment. A hush fell over the group. Louis took a deep breath, forcing his racing heart to steady. "Call an ambulance," he told Trevor quietly. "We need to get her medical attention." And find the site medic. Trevor fumbled for his phone, stepping back outside to get a signal. Louis stayed with the child, gently brushing away pieces of debris. The dog settled in at the girl's side, nuzzling her cheek. For all the frantic barking from before, she was calm now, a living shield of warmth and reassurance. In the distance, the beep of reversing trucks and the grind of heavy machinery continued. Yet here, in this cramped, hidden enclosure, the world seemed to hold its breath. The child clung to the dog, her tears leaving trails in the dust on her cheeks. Louis placed a comforting hand on her shoulder, tears threatening to blur his vision. He couldn't fathom how this child ended up alone in such a hazardous environment. But one thing was certain, the German shepherd had saved her life, leading them to her before. It was too late. In that realization, an unspoken bond formed between Louise, the child, and this mysterious dog, a glimmer of hope in a place where no one expected it. Moments later, the scene exploded into urgency. Workers swiftly cleared debris, creating a path for the rescue team. The child trembled, her breath hitching in sobs, and the dog remained glued to her side. Paramedics arrived with a stretcher and gentle reassurances, but the girl stiffened when strangers tried to move her. She clung to the shepherd's neck, refusing to let go. After some negotiation, the paramedics allowed the dog to remain near her until they could stabilize her ankle and place her onto the stretcher. Louis stepped aside, giving them space, but the dog caught his eye. She looked at him, almost pleading, as though asking him to stay close. He nodded, uncertain why he felt such a connection to this animal, but grateful he could offer a calming presence. "What's your name, honey?" one paramedic asked the girl. She didn't respond. She merely shook her head, tears collecting in her lashes. They decided not to push it. The immediate priority was medical care. As they lifted her onto the stretcher, she moaned in pain, her grip on the dog loosening. Finally, the shepherd let out a distressed whine, pacing around them. Luis reached out and patted the dog's head. "It's all right, girl. They're helping her." His tone was gentle, the same one he used when comforting his younger nieces and nephews. The paramedics guided the stretcher out of the cramped corridor and into the open air. The child squinted against the sudden brightness, her face etched with fear and confusion. Workers parted like the Red Sea, giving them a wide berth, some still in disbelief at what they'd witnessed. Ambulance lights flashed at the far edge of the site, painting the dusty metal beams in pulses of red and white. Another wave of paramedics secured the girl in the ambulance. Yet when they tried to close the doors, the German shepherd tried to jump in after them, barking frantically. A paramedic hesitated. "Is this your dog?" she asked, looking at Luis. He started to shake his head but paused. The child's reaction to the shepherd was nothing short of dependence. It seemed cruel to separate them so abruptly. But paramedics rarely allowed animals to ride along, especially in a city as liability-conscious as New York. "She's not my dog," Luis admitted. "We just found her, barking for help. But the girl, she trusts this dog more than anyone right now. Let them stay together, please." The paramedic glanced at her partner, who shrugged. "All right, we'll make an exception," she said softly, sliding the shepherd in next to the stretcher. "But we can't guarantee the hospital will let her inside." The dog obediently settled at the child's side, resting her chin on the rails of the stretcher. The child reached out, tangling her small fingers in the shepherd's fur. A moment later, the ambulance doors shut, and the sirens wailed as it sped away. Louise stood there, heart pounding, dust settling around him. His co-workers hovered, murmuring in hushed tones. "Good thing that dog came along, or we'd have never known she was in there," said Trevor, wiping sweat from his brow. Another nodded in agreement, still visibly shaken by the discovery. Louis's mind reeled. Who was that girl? How did she get trapped? And where did the dog come from? The morning's routine had dissolved into a flood of questions and emotions. He resolved, then and there, to find out more and to ensure the child got the help she needed. Despite the seismic shift in events, the construction site couldn't grind to a halt indefinitely. New York was a city of tight deadlines, and Hudson Yards was a massive project with countless moving parts. After the ambulance left, workers dispersed back to their tasks. Though the shock lingered, Louis tried to focus on his duties, but his thoughts were miles away. He worried about the girl's condition, replaying her fearful expression as they lifted the fallen plywood. He also couldn't shake the memory of the German shepherd's insistent gaze. The dog had orchestrated everything, leading them through the labyrinth of supplies to the child in need. It was heroic, uncanny even. During his lunch break, he sat on a stack of cinder blocks, picking at a sandwich he no longer had an appetite for. Trevor ambled over, plunking down beside him. "You all right?" Trevor asked, voice gruff with concern. Louis nodded absently. Yeah, just can't stop thinking about it. Trevor sighed, rummaging through his lunch bag. I get it. That was heavy, man. Everyone's shaken up. But you did the right thing, helped save that kid. Luis shook his head. It was the dog, not me. Without her, we'd never have known. Trevor unwrapped a protein bar. Yeah, well, not everyone would follow a random barking dog. Give yourself some credit. Luis allowed a small smile. I just hope she's okay. After lunch, he forced himself to dive back into the day's tasks, but he couldn't resist making a phone call to the local hospital once he was off the clock. He didn't even know the girl's name, which made inquiries difficult. Yet, he persisted. Eventually, he was connected to a nurse who confirmed a young girl had been admitted from a construction site, no identification, no guardians. Her condition was stable, but she was frightened and wouldn't speak. What about the dog? Louise ventured. The nurse hesitated. She was calm, so the paramedics let her stay until the child was examined. But hospital policy doesn't typically allow animals, so the dog was moved to the holding area for strays. She had no tags or microchip. Louise's chest tightened. So, what happens to her now? I'm not sure, the nurse replied sympathetically. Possibly animal care centers of NYC. Or if someone steps forward to claim her. He hung up, restless and uneasy. The girl alone in the hospital, the dog stuck in some kennel. The entire situation gnawed at him. Over dinner that night, he brooded, replaying each detail of the day. Eventually, he set his fork aside and made a decision. Tomorrow, he'd see if he could visit the hospital. Luis woke early, calling in a favor for half a day off. He took the subway to the hospital in Midtown, an unremarkable grey building with tinted windows that reflected the throngs of busy New Yorkers passing by. In the lobby, he found himself feeling out of place among the swirl of patients, doctors, and worried families. At the front desk, he explained why he was there. The receptionist directed him to the pediatric floor, cautioning that because he wasn't family, access might be restricted. Still, something compelled him to try. Stepping off the elevator, he found a quiet corridor lined with pastel walls and small, childlike murals. The squeak of nurses' shoes echoed in the hush. He approached the nurse's station, bracing himself for refusal. A nurse with gentle eyes looked up from her monitor. "Can I help you? I'm looking for a girl who was brought in from the Hudson Yards construction site. She was found by a German shepherd. The first don't know her name," Louis admitted, feeling foolish. The nurse's expression softened. "Oh, you mean the Jane Doe. She's in room 412. Are you a relative?" He shook his head. "No, but I was there. I helped, sort of. I just want to see if she's okay." The nurse hesitated, glancing at the ID badge on Luis's shirt from the construction site. After a moment, she nodded. "She's in state custody until they locate her family or a guardian. But maybe you can see her for a moment. She won't talk to any of us. Maybe a familiar face will help." Luis's heart thudded as he approached room 412. The door was ajar, revealing a small, sterile room with a single bed. The child lay propped against pillows, her leg in a cast, eyes hollow. On the side table, a teddy bear sat untouched, courtesy of the hospital staff. Gently, Luis knocked on the doorframe. The girl's eyes snapped to him, wide with apprehension. "Hi," he said softly, stepping inside. "I'm Luis. Do you remember me?" She regarded him cautiously, her body tensing as if ready to flee, though she was immobilized by her cast. He held up his hands in a non-threatening gesture. "I was one of the workers who found you at the construction site. The dog, she led me to you." At the mention of the dog, her expression shifted. A flicker of something hope, sorrow rose in her eyes. Her gaze darted around as though searching for the shepherd. Louise took a seat in the chair by the bed. "I'm sorry. They wouldn't let her stay." "I know she wanted to. She was trying to protect you." He paused, letting the silence fill with the steady beep of a heart monitor. The girl said nothing, simply staring at him. Clearing his throat, Louise tried again. "Can you tell me your name? Or, if you have a family we can call?" She lowered her gaze, shaking her head ever so slightly. Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them back. The heartbreak in that small gesture almost crushed him. "It's okay," he whispered. "You don't have to talk. I just wanted you to know that you're not alone. We're trying to help you." When he mentioned help, a tear slid down her cheek. Before he could say anything more, a social worker entered the room, giving him a polite but firm look. "Are you a family member?" she asked. Louis stood up, feeling suddenly awkward. "No, I just was there when she was found. I wanted to check on her." The social worker nodded. "We appreciate your concern, but we're in the early stages of figuring out her case." She turned to the girl, voice softening. "Honey, you're safe now." The girl stared at the social worker, silent, the tears still clinging to her lashes. Louis gently touched the edge of her blanket, not sure what else to do. "I'll be back," he promised. She gave no indication that she heard, but he repeated it anyway. He left the hospital with a knot of unresolved tension in his chest. He couldn't force her to talk, nor could he magically produce her guardian. But he felt compelled to do something, if only for that heroic German shepherd who'd alerted them. As he rode the subway back toward the construction site, an idea formed. He'd track down the dog, make sure she was safe. Maybe that, in turn, would help the girl feel more secure. Because if the dog had rescued her, perhaps it was now Louis's turn to rescue the dog. The next morning, after resuming work, Louis asked around. A few workers had seen the dog leave with the ambulance, but had no clue what happened next. Trevor mentioned he'd heard the dog was turned over to animal care centers of NYCACC, a common holding place for stray animals. During his lunch break, Louis hopped into his pickup truck and drove to the nearest ACC branch in Manhattan. The city streets bustled with midday traffic, horns blaring, pedestrians weaving in and out of crosswalks. Yet, he navigated it with single-minded determination. At the ACC building, a nondescript facility with a small sign identifying it, he explained the situation to a receptionist. A German shepherd was found at a construction site, helped rescue a child. She might have been brought here. The receptionist typed some information into the system. "We did receive a female German shepherd a couple of days ago. No ID, no chip. Came in with paramedics' notes. But she's not here anymore." Louis's chest sank. "Not here? Did someone adopt her?" The receptionist shook her head, scanning the notes. "She was transferred to our Brooklyn location. Sometimes we move animals around to different boroughs if space is an issue." "Brooklyn, huh?" Louis muttered, eyeing the clock on the wall. He only had so many hours in the day. But he wasn't willing to give up. "I'll go there. Call first," advised the receptionist. "It's a long drive." Later that evening, after his shift, Louis did just that. He spoke with a staff member at the Brooklyn ACC who confirmed the shepherd was indeed there, but currently on a mandatory stray hold standard procedure to see if an owner would claim her. If no one came forward, she'd be made available for adoption or rescue. Heart pounding, Louis asked, "Is she okay?" "As far as we know, yes," the staff member replied. "She was stressed at first, but has settled down. Good temperament, no aggression. Actually, we have a note that she's friendly and calm." Relief flooded Louis. "I'd like to come by tomorrow." "Sure," said the staff member. "Visiting hours are from 12 p.m. to 5 p.m., but she can't be adopted yet, not until the stray hold is up in 3 more days." Louis thanked them and hung up, a swirl of emotions coursing through him. He felt an urgency to see the dog, to let her know the child was recovering, to ensure she wasn't just lost in the system. But adopting a German shepherd, did he have the time, the space, the means? He wasn't sure. Yet a voice in his mind whispered that this wasn't just any dog. This was the dog who had barked non-stop at a construction site, risking her own safety to save a child. There was something special about her, a bond he couldn't dismiss. On his next day off, a Saturday, Louise made the trek to Brooklyn ACC. The building sat at the end of a busy street, surrounded by auto shops and small businesses. He entered, the sound of barking from the kennels overwhelming his senses. The smell of disinfectant and wet fur hit him immediately. At the front counter, he explained who he was and why he'd come. A volunteer escorted him back through winding corridors of dog runs. Dogs of every shape and size peered through chain-link doors, some wagging tails hopefully, others trembling in corners. Finally, the volunteer stopped at a kennel near the end, labelled with a code and a simple description: female, GSD mix, found Manhattan. Inside lay the German Shepherd, head resting on her paws. When she spotted Louis, she lifted her head, ears pricking. "Hey girl," he said softly, heart twisting at the sight of her confined to a small concrete run. She stood, tail wagging tentatively. As he knelt, she came forward, pressing her muzzle against the chain link, sniffing his outstretched hand. "She's been very calm," the volunteer remarked, "but a bit depressed, I think." Louis nodded. "She's the one who led us to that child at Hudson Yards." The volunteer's eyes widened. "Oh, you're from that story. We heard rumors, but it sounded so unbelievable." Louise reached through the fence, stroking the shepherd's muzzle gently. She licked his fingers, her brown eyes brightening. "It's true," he said, feeling a lump in his throat. "She saved a life." A wave of emotion hit him. He realized how deeply he wanted to give this dog a home, not just as a gesture of gratitude, but because he sensed their destinies were entwined by that harrowing event. Yet, practical concerns nagged at him. He lived in a small one-bedroom apartment in Queens. He worked long hours, and shepherds needed ample exercise. Still, something in him rebelled at the idea of leaving her here. "When does her hold end?" he asked. "Monday," the volunteer said. "After that, she's up for adoption. If no one claims her, I want to adopt her," Louis blurted, surprising even himself with the words. The volunteer smiled. "That's wonderful. I'd suggest coming first thing Monday to fill out the paperwork. Sometimes shepherds get claimed fast." He nodded, heart pounding. After spending a few more minutes letting the dog lick his hand, he forced himself to stand. "I'll be back," he promised. She let out a small whine as he walked away, her gaze following him until he turned the corner. All the way home, he wrestled with doubt. Could he handle the responsibility? The memory of the child in the hospital haunted him, and the thought of this incredible dog languishing behind bars stung his conscience. He made up his mind he'd do whatever it took. This dog deserved safety and love. That Sunday, restlessness consumed him. He visited the hospital once more, only to find that the girl remained silent. A new social worker mentioned that no relatives had come forward yet. They were investigating a missing persons report, suspecting the child might be from out of state. Louise peeked into her room through the glass panel. She lay there, awake, staring at the wall. Her leg was elevated, wrapped in a fresh cast. He wondered if she thought about the dog, if she missed the warmth of that furry protector. He left without disturbing her, determined to share good news the next time he saw her, that her shepherd was safe and no longer in a kennel. Early Monday morning, Louise arrived at the ACC well before the official opening time. He paced near the door, tension thrumming through him. The moment they unlocked, he rushed in. The same volunteer recognized him. She gave a cheerful wave. "You're here for the German Shepherd." He nodded, swallowing a nervous lump in his throat. The volunteer guided him through forms, disclaimers, and adoption guidelines. He felt the weight of each signature committing to providing adequate housing, veterinary care, and training. Finally, they led him back to the kennel. The shepherd was lying down, but as soon as she recognized him, her tail thumped the floor. She stood, pressing her snout to the chain link. Luis's chest tightened. I was thinking I could call her Aurora, he said tentatively to the volunteer, referencing the dawn that had broken on the day he'd found her. But something about it felt off, perhaps too poetic. He looked into the dog's eyes, searching. The volunteer shrugged. It's your choice. You can rename her anything. She doesn't have an existing name on file. He crouched, letting her lick his palm through the gate. How about Roxy? He murmured, noticing a slight tilt of her head. It was a simpler name with a strength that matched her spirit. Yeah, you look like a Roxy. The volunteer smiled. Roxy it is. After paying the adoption fee, finalizing paperwork, and receiving a quick overview of her recent health check, he was given her leash. With the kennel door open, Roxy stepped out hesitantly, glancing around as if unsure this was real. Luis knelt to her level, hooking the leash gently. Come on, girl, let's go home. Her ears perked, and she followed him down the corridor, past the barking dogs, toward the exit. In the lobby, a couple of staff members paused to witness the moment, sending well wishes. One older volunteer patted Roxy on the head. You're a lucky dog, she murmured, but Luis felt the luck was his. The moment they stepped onto the sidewalk, Roxy lifted her muzzle to the city air, as though tasting freedom for the first time. Her tail gave a tentative wag, and she pressed her shoulder against Luis's leg. He responded by stroking the soft fur behind her ears, a wave of warmth filling his chest. In that instant, the hectic swirl of Manhattan traffic, the relentless pace of city life, all of it receded. There was only this man and this dog, bound together by a single act of heroism. Louise's one-bedroom apartment in Queens was hardly luxurious, but it was homey and clean. Roxy padded in, sniffing every corner with curious caution. She paused at the couch, the dining table, the small galley kitchen, as if taking an inventory of these new surroundings. Louis set down the bag of supplies he'd picked up from the shelter dog food, a collar, a simple bed. He unrolled the bed in a corner of the living room. Roxy circled it, then lay down with a contented sigh. Louis smiled, relieved that she seemed comfortable. Over the next few days, both of them navigated the challenges of their new life together. Roxy had never been house-trained, so there were a few accidents on the kitchen floor. She startled at loud noises, like the rumble of trucks outside or the neighbor's vacuum, but she learned quickly. Luis made sure to walk her in the morning before work, then asked his friend Natalia, who lived in the same building, to let Roxy out midday. Natalia, a fellow animal lover, agreed enthusiastically, soothed by the dog's gentle nature. The biggest hurdle was the building's pet policy. The landlord, Mr. Pence, eyed Roxy suspiciously the first time he saw her. "That's a big dog," he grumbled. "You sure you can handle her?" Louis nodded firmly. "She's well behaved. She saved a kid's life." Mr. Pence wasn't exactly moved by heroics. He cared more about noise and potential damage. "Keep her under control, Delgado. Any complaints, and we'll have a problem." Louis assured him they'd be model tenants, hoping Roxy's calm demeanor would win him over eventually. In the quiet evenings, Louise often replayed the events that led Roxy to him. He pictured the child in the hospital, alone and silent. Sometimes he worried that adopting Roxy meant he might never see that child again, that the link between them would dissolve. But a deeper part of him believed this was all connected, that he might find a way to help the child too. Roxy adapted to apartment life faster than he expected. She seemed grateful for every morsel of food, every scratch behind the ears. Occasionally, she'd wake him at night with a low whine, pacing near the door. Louis sensed she was anxious about something, perhaps searching for the girl she'd rescued. But each time, he calmed her, whispering softly, "We'll see her again, I promise." And though he didn't know how or when, he intended to keep that promise. A few weeks passed. Between the demands of the construction site and the daily responsibilities of caring for Roxy, Luis's life brimmed with purpose, yet he felt unsettled about the child. Finally, after mustering enough courage, he visited the hospital again, even though he worried they'd turn him away. To his surprise, the social worker recognized him and allowed him a brief visit. The girl, still in the same room, looked healthier, her cast decorated with colorful stickers, her hair freshly washed, but her eyes remained guarded. Luis smiled tentatively. "Hi, remember me?" he asked, keeping his distance to avoid overwhelming her. She stared, her fingers twisting the blanket. The social worker hovered near the doorway, ready to intervene if needed. I adopted the dog," Luis ventured, his voice soft. "She's safe now. I call her Roxy." At that, the girl's expression flickered with something like longing. Her lips parted slightly, as though she wanted to speak, but no sound emerged. Luis continued gently. "I know you've been through a lot. I just wanted you to know Roxy's okay. She's living with me, in Queens. If you'd like to see her, maybe I can bring her sometime." He glanced at the social worker, who frowned. "We have strict protocols. She's a ward of the state until we locate her guardian or an appropriate foster home." "I understand," Luis replied, nodding. Then he turned back to the girl. "I promise I won't push you to talk. I just wanted you to know that Roxy's not in a cage anymore." Her eyes moistened, and she blinked rapidly. For a second, he thought she might cry. But she inhaled, steadied herself, and then ever so slightly she smiled. It was a tiny, fleeting expression, but it radiated genuine relief. Seeing that smile nearly broke him. He realized how deeply this child must have cared for the dog, how that bond had likely formed during some unimaginable struggle. His voice turned husky with emotion. "I'll come back soon. Hopefully, I can bring Roxy to visit if you want." She nodded almost imperceptibly. The social worker, though cautious, didn't step in to forbid it. Perhaps she recognized the therapeutic potential in such a reunion. Luis left the hospital with a renewed sense of resolve. He needed to find a way for them to see each other, both the child and the dog that rescued her. But he also knew he had to tread carefully. The system had rules, and he was an outsider. Still, if there was one thing he'd learned from Roxy's unwavering bark at the construction site, it was that sometimes you had to persist, no matter how long it took for people to pay attention. As the weeks went on, bits and pieces about the girl's background began to surface. The police had circulated her photo among missing children reports, but nothing conclusive emerged. She remained in the hospital for longer than expected. Her ankle had been more seriously fractured, and the doctors wanted to ensure proper healing. Occasionally, local news outlets ran segments on the construction site child, praising the heroic dog that saved her. They interviewed a few workers from the site, but Luis declined the spotlight. He preferred to keep Roxy's new life private. Meanwhile, Roxy flourished under his care. Despite her quiet moments of anxiety, she displayed a playful side, pouncing on squeaky toys, wagging her tail when Luis returned from work. Natalia, his neighbor, often joined them for walks, delighted by how well-behaved Roxy was. One Sunday morning, as they strolled through a small park near the apartment, Roxy froze in place. Her ears perked, nose sniffing the air. Luis followed her gaze to a bench where a homeless woman huddled under a blanket. The woman petted a scraggly stray cat that perched on her lap. Roxy let out a soft whine, as though compelled by empathy. Luis approached cautiously, offering the woman a polite greeting. She looked up, startled, her eyes wary. Yet, Roxy wagged her tail, gently nudging the woman's hand. A lump formed in Luis's throat. He realized Roxy wasn't just a random hero. She had a unique sensitivity toward the vulnerable. Maybe it was part of her nature, or maybe it came from her own experience of hardship. He and Natalia ended up chatting with the homeless woman named Margie. She mentioned she'd been evicted months ago, bouncing between shelters. The cat was her only companion. Quietly, Natalia slipped her a few bills, and Louis promised to check back. As they walked away, Roxy seemed reluctant to leave, glancing back at Margie as if wanting to stay. "That dog has a good heart," Natalia remarked, scratching Roxy's ears, "just like her owner." Louis shrugged, fighting a swirl of emotions. Roxy's empathy made him think of the child again, and how much good a single moment of connection could do. He vowed not to give up on finding a path for them to see each other. A few days later, the social worker finally called. She explained that the hospital was discharging the girl soon, placing her into a temporary group home until a foster family could be arranged. The girl had asked through gestures, not words, if she could see the dog one more time before leaving the hospital. Louise felt his heart leap. "Of course. Tell me when and I'll bring her right away." The designated day was a grey, drizzly Wednesday. Louis took off work early and carefully loaded Roxy into his pickup truck, pulling her seatbelt harness snug. She peered out the window, ears tilted with curiosity, her muzzle pressed to the glass, collecting droplets of rain. When they arrived at the hospital, a nurse and the social worker met them at a side entrance to avoid crowding or violating any hospital policies. Roxy trotted in obediently, tail swishing. In a small recreational room on the pediatric floor, the girl waited in a wheelchair. Her cast remained, but she looked stronger, her face healthier. The moment Roxy rounded the corner, the girl gasped an audible sound that caused the nurse and social worker to exchange surprised glances. Louis smiled gently. "Here she is." Roxy bounded forward, but stopped short, as if sensing the need for caution. She placed her head gently in the girl's lap, looking up with warm, brown eyes. The girl's hands, small and tentative, descended onto Roxy's fur, stroking gingerly at first, then with more confidence. Tears slipped down her cheeks, and this time she didn't fight them. The air in the room seemed charged with emotion. Even the social worker wiped her eyes, moved by the scene. Louis crouched beside them, letting Roxy absorb the girl's attention. After a few moments, the girl surprised everyone by speaking, her voice a faint whisper. "Roxy." Louis' breath caught. He glanced at the social worker, who stared in astonishment. The nurse clasped her hands over her mouth, tears brimming. Until now, the girl had refused or been unable to speak. This single word, Roxy, was the first sign of her willingness to communicate. "Yes," Louis said softly, his eyes stinging. "That's her name." The girl continued to stroke Roxy's ears, her lower lip quivering. She spoke again, voice trembling. "She found me." Louis nodded, swallowing past the lump in his throat. "She did. She barked until we came to help." The child gazed at Roxy with an expression of profound gratitude and love. For a moment, none of them spoke, letting the weight of that connection fill the room. Eventually, the social worker cleared her throat, voice trembling. "Honey, can you tell us your name?" "Do you remember it?" The girl hesitated, tears sliding down her cheeks. Her gaze flicked to Louis, seeking reassurance. He gave her a small nod, encouraging her with his eyes. She sniffled, then forced out another whisper, each syllable as though it cost her dearly. "My name is Elena." The nurse exhaled, relief flooding her features. She gently touched Elena's shoulder. "That's a lovely name, Elena. Thank you for telling us." Elena clung to Roxy's fur, breathing shakily. Although she still seemed overwhelmed, those few words felt like an enormous breakthrough. Louis silently thanked whatever force had led him to adopt Roxy. If not for the dog's presence, Elena might have remained locked in silence, lost in trauma. But now, with the bond they shared, a door to healing had cracked open. In the days following Elena's discharge, social services placed her temporarily in a group home for children without identified guardians. With her name, they could finally search more accurately for her family. though leads remained scarce. Police suspected she might have come from outside New York, possibly fleeing a troubled situation. Meanwhile, the fact that Elena had spoken even just a few words was celebrated as a major breakthrough. She still communicated sparingly, but her therapists believed her bond with Roxy could be key to further progress. One afternoon, Louise received a call from the social worker, Miss Kirkwood. "Elena's been asking about Roxy. She's having a tough time adjusting to the group home." Louise's heart tightened. "Can I bring Roxy to visit her?" "Technically, visitors to the group home require background checks," Miss Kirkwood said, "but I think this is important for her well-being. Let's arrange something supervised, maybe once a week." An unexpected surge of joy warmed Louis. He agreed without hesitation. The following Sunday, he drove Roxy to the group home, a modest brick building in a quieter part of the city. Miss Kirkwood greeted him at the door, guiding them to a small courtyard out back, where Elena sat on a bench under a tree. Elena looked thinner than he'd remembered, her legs still in a cast, but her face lit up when she spotted Roxy bounding toward her. Without words, she threw her arms around the dog, burying her face in Roxy's fur. Roxy licked her cheek gently, tail wagging so hard it threatened to knock her off balance. Louise pulled up a chair, watching the reunion. This time, Elena managed a few more words, halting and soft. "1. I missed you." Miss Kirkwood lingered nearby, quietly observing. She occasionally jotted notes, perhaps impressed by the emotional comfort Roxy provided. Elena still had trouble opening up about her past, but the presence of the dog loosened her guard. After a while, Elena's eyes flicked to Louis. "Thank you for Roxy," she whispered. He smiled, swallowing a wave of emotion. "I should be thanking you. She's a wonderful friend." They spent the next hour that way, Elena petting and hugging Roxy, sometimes leaning against Louis when she grew tired. Though the conversation was minimal, the connection was palpable. Even Miss Kirkwood had to dab away tears at one point. As the sun shifted, Miss Kirkwood approached gently. "We need to get Elena ready for dinner," she said. "But this was wonderful." Elena clung to Roxy for a moment longer, then released her. Her eyes swam with tears, but she managed a tiny smile. "Come back," she murmured, voice cracking. Louise nodded, heart aching. "I promise. Every week, if they let me." He and Roxy left the group home, both subdued by the weight of that visit. Yet a slender thread of hope wove through Louis's heart. He saw how Elena's spirit brightened when reunited with Roxy. He resolved to keep that lifeline intact, no matter what the bureaucratic obstacles. Over the next few weeks, Louise and Roxy visited Elena regularly. The group home staff welcomed them, noticing the positive impact on Elena's emotional state. While the child still rarely spoke more than a few words at a time, she began to share small smiles and gestures of excitement when they arrived. Each Sunday, they'd spend an hour in the courtyard. Elena's cast was eventually removed, replaced by a brace to support her still healing ankle. She'd try to walk around the courtyard, leaning on crutches, with Roxy faithfully pacing alongside. Sometimes Elena would glance at Louis, a question in her eyes. She never asked it aloud, but he sensed. She wondered why he cared so much about her. The truth was, he wasn't entirely sure. He just knew that from the moment he found her pinned under that plywood, something inside him awakened a protectiveness, a sense of purpose that extended beyond the job site. Maybe it was the memory of losing his little sister years ago to an illness, or maybe it was simply human compassion. But the more time he spent with Elena, the more he saw how desperately she needed someone to trust. At the same time, paperwork and investigations moved at a snail's pace. No relatives had stepped forward, and the child welfare system was wary of making decisions without thorough checks. One day, Miss Kirkwood pulled Louise aside. "Elena's opened up in therapy a bit," she said. "We've learned she might have been traveling with her mother, but they got separated. There are conflicting details. Elena's memory is fuzzy, She seems to think her mother could still be in New York, but there's no record of her mother's name. Louise felt a pang of empathy. So, what happens now? She'll remain a ward of the state until her mother is found or a permanent placement is arranged, Miss Kirkwood explained. We'll try fostering or adoption eventually. But it's complicated, given we don't know the mother's status. He glanced over at Elena, who sat on the bench scratching Roxy's ears. If no one claims her, would adoption be an option for me? The words poured out before he could fully weigh them. Miss Kirkwood blinked, studying him carefully. That's a big step. Are you certain you want that responsibility? He inhaled, glancing at Roxy and Elena together. I'm not sure of anything, he admitted, but I do know I can't stand by while she's alone in the system. Not if there's something I can do. She pressed her lips together. I understand. If you're serious, we can explore it. But it involves home studies, background checks, parental fitness evaluations. And if her mother is eventually found, that changes everything. He nodded resolutely. I get it. I just want to help. That night, Louis paced his apartment, Roxy watching him quizzically. He realized the enormity of what he'd said. Adopting a child was life-changing more than adopting a dog, more than any single decision he'd ever made. Yet a quiet conviction rooted within him. He cared for Elena, felt responsible in a way he couldn't explain. Roxy trotted over, nuzzling his hand. He sank onto the couch, burying his face in her fur. You changed my life, girl, he whispered. Now we might change hers too. The months that followed were a whirlwind of uncertainty for Louis, who had decided to initiate the foster to adopt process for Elena, Miss Kirkwood guided him through the endless paperwork, while the entire construction crew at Hudson Yards, touched by Elena's plight, offered support. Louise attended parenting classes, opened his modest apartment to inspections, and faced constant worry about money, time, and whether Elena's mother would suddenly reappear. Meanwhile, Elena's healing continued. She spoke more, though only about Roxy and fragments of her daily life, keeping her past in shadows. Therapists warned Louis that fostering a child with deep emotional scars would be challenging, but he pressed on, buoyed by his convictions. Roxy, the German shepherd who had led them to Elena, became a vital bridge. Her presence lit up the child's eyes at every visit to the group home, forging an unbreakable bond between them. Eventually, Miss Kirkwood announced they could place Elena in Louise's care temporarily. With a mixture of relief and apprehension, he prepared his living space, sacrificing his own bedroom so Elena could have privacy, buying a small bed, stuffed animals, and colorful sheets to welcome her. On a crisp autumn day, Louise and Roxy arrived at the group home to pick her up. She stepped out, clutching a small duffel bag, torn between hope and fear. Thank you, she whispered to Louise when she saw the new bedroom. Those two words confirmed the gravity of what lay ahead, the challenge of building a life together. Living under the same roof brought joys and trials. Elena suffered nightmares, sometimes waking in silent screams. The simplest tasks, like shopping or visiting the park, could unearth her anxieties. She occasionally withdrew into herself, afraid of being sent away again. Yet Roxy was her constant anchor, pressing her muzzle into Elena's trembling hands whenever fear overwhelmed her. If Elena hesitated to leave the apartment, Roxy nudged her gently, wordlessly encouraging her forward. Louis struggled too, balancing long hours at the construction site with the demands of caring for Elena. He leaned on friends, including Natalia, who offered moral support. One evening, after a particularly rough day, Elena had an anxiety attack at school. He slumped on the couch, head in his hands. What if I'm not good enough for her? He murmured. Roxy nudged him, as if saying he wasn't alone. Later that night, Elena quietly approached, tears on her cheeks. I'm sorry I made trouble, she said, voice trembling. Louise knelt, assuring her she wasn't causing trouble, that she was safe in his home. "I don't want you to send me away," she whispered, clinging to him. He held her close, promising he wouldn't. Roxy hovered protectively, sealing the moment with quiet solidarity. Gradually, Elena opened up, recalling a life of constant moves and uncertain tomorrows. Although the full story remained elusive, Louise learned enough to understand her fear of abandonment. Each tearful revelation ended with her leaning on Roxy and finding warmth in Louise's arms. In time, Elena's trust in him deepened. One morning, as they headed out, Elena smiled shyly. "I'm glad I'm here," she said, petting Roxy's head. Louise felt emotion well in his chest. "So am I," he replied, and, as they stepped into the world together, the German shepherd guiding them both, they carried the promise of a family forged by courage, compassion, and the enduring power of love. Though challenges surely lay ahead, Louis felt an unshakable certainty that each step forward was worth it. Elena's fragile hope and Roxy's unwavering devotion had already transformed a lonely routine into a life brimming with purpose. Their journey, he knew, was only just beginning. Thank you for following the remarkable journey of a determined German shepherd who refused to be ignored at a bustling construction site in the heart of Manhattan. Her endless barking led workers to uncover a hidden child and changed multiple lives in the process, reminding us that resilience and empathy can form the foundation of extraordinary bonds. In a world often defined by rush and routine, this story shows how a single act of courage can spark hope, love, and healing. We've seen how Roxy's devotion bridged fears and traumas, forging a new family where none existed before. May their path inspire all of us to look more closely at the silent cries for help around us and to answer with open hearts. If this story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Let's continue spreading stories of compassion and transformation, stories that remind us at every turn what it truly means to care. Thank you.